I went to my son's house on Christmas, carrying gifts and hope in my heart. But he looked me in the eye, denied knowing me, and kicked me out into the cold. That night changed everything. I stayed silent. Until the day I took my revenge. Before continue, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. That's free and only way to support us. Thank you. The snow crunched softly beneath my boots as I made my way down the quiet street, the icy wind biting through my coat. It was Christmas Eve, and the entire neighborhood looked like something out of a postcard. Houses were glowing with colorful lights, trees sparkled through frosted windows, and the faint sound of carols drifted in the cold night air. My hands clutched a small bag filled with carefully wrapped gifts, and with every step, my heart pounded a little faster. I told myself this year would be different. This year, maybe my son would look at me the way he used to when he was little, with that innocent, unshakable love in his eyes. It had been years since we spent Christmas together, and I wanted to believe that time healed everything. I wanted to believe I was still his family. When I reached his house, it almost took my breath away. The place was enormous, far grander than I ever imagined. Warm golden lights framed every edge, and through the big glass windows, I could see a tall, beautifully decorated tree, glimmering like a diamond. I paused for a moment on the front steps, inhaling deeply as I tried to calm the storm in my chest. I pressed the doorbell, and somewhere inside, a cheerful melody played. I could hear muffled laughter, the clinking of glasses, and soft music drifting through the walls. The sound made me smile. This was it. This was home. The door opened after a moment, and there he was, my son. But instead of the warmth I expected, I was met with a cold, hard stare. His expression froze when his eyes landed on me, as though I was some unwelcome stranger standing on his porch. I waited for him to speak, to smile, to say anything that would make this less awkward, but silence filled the space between us like heavy snow. He stepped outside, pulling the door halfway closed behind him, as though shielding his world from me. The laughter inside continued, mocking me, reminding me that I was on the outside of his perfect life. His voice finally came, low and sharp, and though I never imagined I'd hear such words from my own son, they cut through me like icy wind. He said I didn't belong there. He said he didn't know me. For a moment, I just stood there, unable to breathe. My throat tightened, but no words came. The gift bag trembled in my hand, my knuckles pale against the cold. Behind him, I could hear his wife's voice calling cheerfully, asking who was at the door. He turned his head slightly, replying casually, dismissing me as though I were nothing more than an unexpected delivery. I felt my chest sink as the weight of the moment pressed down on me. All the memories, the scraped knees I bandaged, the nights I stayed awake when he was sick, the sacrifices I made so he could have everything he ever wanted, flashed before my eyes. And now, standing on his porch, I realized none of it mattered anymore. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him and shake him until he remembered who I was. But instead, I stood silent, the snowflakes landing on my coat melting instantly against the heat of my shame. I nodded slowly, forcing myself to swallow the storm inside me, and turned away. My footsteps crunched softly as I walked back into the bitter night. I didn't look back once. The warm lights behind me faded with every step, and the laughter that spilled from his house became nothing more than an echo in the distance. The cold cut deeper the farther I walked, but it wasn't the winter air that froze me from the inside out. It was him. My son. My own blood. By the time I reached the end of the street, the pain in my chest had shifted. It wasn't sadness anymore. It wasn't heartbreak. It was something colder, sharper, and heavier than anything I had ever felt. That night, as the snow fell endlessly from the dark sky, something inside me broke. And in that silence, one thought burned brighter than every Christmas light on his perfect house. This wasn't over. The cold air sliced through me as I walked away from his house, the crunch of snow beneath my boots sounding louder than my own thoughts. My breath came out in soft white clouds, dissolving into the night, but the storm raging inside me had no intention of fading. I had spent weeks imagining this Christmas. I pictured the warm smiles, the hugs, the laughter, the shared meal. I pictured him introducing me to his friends proudly, saying this is my father. But reality shattered that fragile dream in seconds. By the time I reached the empty street corner, my knees felt weak, but I forced myself to keep moving. I didn't want anyone to see me like this, a man who had been reduced to a stranger by his own blood. I gripped the little gift bag tighter, its ribbon digging into my palm, leaving deep marks in my skin. The presents I had chosen so carefully suddenly felt meaningless, like pieces of my dignity wrapped in glossy paper. When I finally stepped into my small, silent house, the darkness greeted me like an old friend. The Christmas lights I had strung up earlier now mocked me, their cheerful glow clashing against the hollow ache inside my chest. I dropped the bag onto the couch, the soft thud echoing louder than it should have. I sank into my worn-out armchair and stared at the faint glow of the miniature tree I had decorated for myself. For years, I had dreamed of sitting around a big tree with my son, his wife, maybe even grandchildren one day. I imagined laughter filling the air, plates clinking, and memories being made. But tonight, the only sound in my house was the humming of the old heater fighting against the biting cold. I leaned back and closed my eyes, but there was no escaping the memories. I thought of the years I worked double shifts, saving every dollar so he could go to college without debt. I thought of the nights I stayed awake when he had a fever, praying silently for his recovery. I thought of the sacrifices I made, things I never told him, things he never noticed. And yet, this was how he repaid me. At first, I thought I would cry. I thought the pain would drown me, but it didn't. It burned instead, slowly, deeply, unforgivingly. Somewhere between the silence and the shadows, that burning began to take shape. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was something colder. Revenge. I didn't want to hurt him physically, no. That would be too easy, too simple. What I wanted was deeper than that. I wanted him to feel the weight of my absence. I wanted him to know what it felt like to be stripped of everything, to have the foundation of his perfect little world collapse right beneath his feet. But revenge couldn't be rushed. No, I had to be patient. The first step was silence. I didn't call him. I didn't message him. I didn't even try to explain myself. I wanted him to believe I had accepted his rejection, that I had disappeared into the shadows of his life for good. Let him grow comfortable. Let him think he had erased me completely. Because the truth was, I was watching. I began quietly keeping track of things, where he worked, who he spent time with, where his money went, and most importantly, what he valued most. I didn't do it out of hatred. I did it out of necessity. The more I learned, the more I realized that his perfect life wasn't as unshakable as it appeared. It was fragile. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. His wealth, his marriage, his reputation, all of it rested on carefully balanced lies, secrets, and half-truths. One small push, and the entire tower would come crashing down. And I would be the one to deliver that push. That night, I stayed awake until dawn, sitting by the window and watching the snowfall cover the empty street. My reflection in the glass looked different somehow. The man staring back at me wasn't broken anymore. He wasn't defeated. He was waiting. I promised myself something under that cold, silent sky. The next time I stepped onto that porch, it wouldn't be as the father he threw away. It would be as the storm he never saw coming. The following days moved slowly, like the thick winter fog that hung over the city. I kept to myself, staying inside my small house, watching the world pass me by through frosted windows. But my mind was awake, restless, working like a machine that refused to stop. I replayed that night over and over, his face, his cold stare, the sound of his voice when he told me I didn't belong there. The pain hit me in waves, sharp and cutting, but with every wave, my resolve grew stronger. I couldn't let this go. I wouldn't. I started observing him from a distance, quietly, silently, like a shadow following his every move. Not in a way that would make anyone suspicious. No, this had to be subtle. I became invisible to his world, and it worked perfectly, because to him I already didn't exist. I discovered that his life wasn't as flawless as it seemed. The more I listened, the more I saw, the clearer it became. He had built his reputation on a fragile foundation, polished on the surface, rotten underneath. His work, his social circle, even his marriage. All of it depended on one thing: appearances. I heard whispers about his company through an old friend of mine who worked in finance. The deals he was making weren't as clean as he let people believe. He was bending rules, cutting corners, and covering it all with a charming smile. His social media painted him as a family man, successful, loved by everyone. But the truth was messy. His wife, too, had her secrets. People talked when they thought no one was listening, and I listened carefully. There were rumors about her friendships, whispers about late-night meetings, and I filed every detail away in my mind. I didn't need everything at once. I just needed enough to know where to hit when the time came. I didn't act on anything yet. No, patience was my greatest weapon. Revenge isn't about rushing in with anger. It's about precision. It's about knowing exactly when to strike, when they least expect it, when they're at their highest, so the fall hurts the most. Weeks passed like this, and I remained silent. I wanted him to feel safe, untouchable, secure in the world he thought he'd built. Every time he posted another smiling picture online, I watched. Every time he attended another lavish party, I kept track. Every time his name appeared in the papers, I took notes. It was strange, though. The more I learned about his life, the less he felt like the boy I once raised. Somewhere along the way, he became someone else entirely, a man obsessed with wealth, image, and power. I wondered if I ever truly knew him at all. One night, as I sat at my kitchen table with stacks of notes spread before me, I realized something. He wasn't just afraid of failure. He was terrified of humiliation. His entire world depended on people believing he was perfect, the successful man, the loving husband, the devoted son. That became my leverage. I decided then and there that my revenge wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be violent. It wouldn't even come from me directly. No, it would come from the truth. The truth he tried so hard to bury under his perfect little image. I spent hours crafting a plan, one step at a time, making sure every move was calculated. Nothing reckless. Nothing sloppy. One mistake and everything could collapse before I was ready. As the clock ticked past midnight, I stood by the window, staring at the blanket of snow outside. My reflection looked calm, almost too calm, like the stillness before a storm. He didn't know it yet, but I had already started pulling the first threads of his carefully woven life. And once I was done, everything he built, the house, the status, the reputation, the pride, would unravel. That night, for the first time since he closed that door on me, I slept soundly. Because I knew something he didn't. His mask was slipping. And soon, everyone would see the man hiding underneath it. The winter days stretched endlessly, but my resolve never wavered. By now, the pain of rejection had settled into something colder, calmer, a quiet determination that fueled me with every breath. I wasn't rushing anymore. I was preparing. I started spending more time in places I knew would give me answers. Cafes where his co-workers gathered after office hours, restaurants where his friends boasted about their lives, community events where his name was often dropped like a badge of pride. People talk when they think you're no one, and I became an expert at being invisible. The first piece of the puzzle came from a financial advisor I knew from years ago. Over a casual cup of coffee, he mentioned my son's company and how quickly it had grown in recent months. Too quickly. He said the numbers didn't add up. Some deals looked suspicious, some investors shady. I didn't push him for details, just nodded, letting him believe I was curious in passing. But inside, a fire lit up. Then there was his wife. Her life, too, was a performance. Perfect smiles, expensive clothes, elegant parties, all designed to maintain an image. But beneath the glitter, cracks were showing. Rumors about late-night arguments floated through small circles. Whispers about her secret meetings, hidden debts, and strained friendships reached my ears. I kept my notes meticulous and my mind sharper than ever. I realized something important during those quiet weeks of observation. Their entire life was built like a delicate glass tower. It was tall, shiny, and breathtaking from afar, but one wrong move, one carefully placed push, and it would all shatter. I didn't want to destroy him financially. No, that would be too simple, too predictable. What I wanted was deeper, something he couldn't fix with money or influence. I wanted to hit where it would hurt the most, his pride, his image, his perfect facade. One night, I sat in my dimly lit living room, surrounded by papers, photos, and names scrawled on sticky notes. I traced my finger over the small network I had pieced together, his co-workers, his investors, his wife's connections, his favorite charities. Every thread I followed led me closer to the core of his world, and soon I knew exactly where the cracks were weakest. But I couldn't act yet. Timing was everything. Then came the opportunity one had been waiting for. I overheard two of his acquaintances talking at a local cafe, their voices low but not low enough. They were discussing a holiday gala his company was planning, a massive event where investors, partners, and the press would all be present. A night designed to flaunt his success, his power, and his perfect life. I sat there, sipping my coffee slowly, while inside my mind was racing. This was it. This was the stage. One wrong move in front of those people, one well-placed revelation, and his carefully polished mask would crumble for everyone to see. From that day on, my preparations intensified. I began reaching out discreetly to people who knew the darker truths about his deals. A few were hesitant, but most were eager to talk. Resentment has a way of loosening tongues, especially when they think no one will trace it back to them. As the days passed, I pieced together more than enough to set the trap. The documents, the accounts, the whispers, I had everything I needed. But the real weapon wasn't the information itself. It was knowing exactly when to release it, and how. By the time the snow piled thick on the sidewalks and the city's lights glimmered against the frosted streets, my plan was almost complete. I wasn't rushing, though. I couldn't afford a single mistake. Revenge, I reminded myself, wasn't a sprint. It was a slow, quiet dance. Each step I took, I imagined his face when the truth came crashing down. The disbelief, the panic, the realization that the man he had become, the man who erased me from his life, would be exposed for the world to see. I went to bed that night with a strange calmness. I had no anger left, no tears, no desperation. Only focus. Because soon, his perfect little kingdom would start to tremble. And when it fell, he would finally understand what it feels like to lose everything you thought was untouchable. The city was buzzing with festive energy as the gala approached. Streets glimmered with Christmas lights, and every shop window flaunted its best decorations. But for me, there was no celebration, only preparation. Every second, every thought, every breath led to one goal: the night his perfect little world would begin to crumble. I had become invisible in his world, and I used that power to its fullest. To him, I didn't exist anymore, which meant I could move without suspicion. People spoke freely around me, thinking I was just another quiet face in the crowd. I listened, observed, and gathered every thread of information until I had a web so tight he wouldn't see it until it was too late. The gala was his pride. From what I overheard, it was designed to be the biggest night of the year: investors, journalists, influential names, and wealthy faces, all in one place. A showcase of power, a celebration of his so-called success. I knew him well enough to understand how much this event meant. He lived for approval, for applause, for admiration. That fragile ego was my target. For weeks, I planned carefully, perfecting every detail. I rehearsed conversations in my head, memorized timings, and secured everything I needed to pull the strings from the shadows. I wasn't going to storm in and make a scene. No, that would be sloppy and desperate. My revenge had to be silent, clever, and absolute. On the night of the gala, I dressed in my best suit, one he wouldn't recognize, one that blended me into the sea of wealthy faces. I looked like everyone else in that grand hall, a guest sipping champagne, exchanging polite smiles. The chandeliers sparkled above, the music swelled through the air, and the scent of expensive perfume mixed with freshly polished marble floors. Everything looked flawless. But beneath the surface, chaos waited to be unleashed. I moved through the crowd quietly, unseen and unnoticed. His voice carried from across the hall, smooth, confident, dripping with charm as he entertained his guests. He had perfected his performance over the years, his gestures rehearsed, his words calculated. To everyone else, he was a man of vision, a leader, a success story. But I knew better. As the speeches began, I positioned myself where I could see everything clearly: him on stage, his wife at his side, the investors gathered in front. I could feel the tension thrumming beneath my skin, my heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of the room. It was almost time. The trap wasn't loud or dramatic. I didn't storm the stage. I didn't confront him directly. Instead, I let the truth move through whispers. A few quiet conversations in the right ears, a handful of documents slipped discreetly into the hands of people who mattered, and the effect was immediate. Faces in the crowd started shifting, smiles fading into suspicion, murmurs rippling like a current beneath the music. Investors whispered to each other, exchanging uneasy glances. His wife's expression tightened slightly as she noticed the change in the air. He, standing there so confidently under the bright lights, didn't even realize the storm forming around him. By the time his speech ended, the room had shifted entirely. The applause was softer, polite but hollow. People began pulling away, whispering in corners, making urgent phone calls. And he, for the first time in years, looked uncertain. I could see it, the faint crease between his brows, the slight stiffness in his jaw. He felt it but didn't understand it yet. I stayed until the very end, watching as cracks formed in the image he had built so carefully. The investors who once laughed at his jokes left with barely a handshake. His wife avoided his eyes, her phone buzzing relentlessly in her hand. The whispers around him grew louder, impossible to ignore. That night, I walked out of the gala with a calmness I hadn't felt in years. I didn't need to confront him. I didn't need to say a single word. I had planted the seed. And soon, the roots of doubt would tear through everything he thought was unshakable. As I stepped outside, the winter air hit my face, sharp and cold, but I smiled for the first time since that Christmas night. Because now, the game had truly begun. The morning after the gala, the city looked the same, blanketed in soft snow, quiet and serene, but I knew his world wasn't the same anymore. I woke early and brewed myself a cup of coffee, the bitter aroma filling the air, and sat by the window as the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds. Somewhere across the city, he was waking up to chaos. I didn't need to call anyone to know it. I had spent weeks studying his life, his patterns, his weaknesses. One whisper in the right ear was enough to set the dominoes falling. By now, his phone would be buzzing endlessly, investors demanding answers, journalists chasing statements, partners threatening to pull out of deals. The same people who once worshipped him were already sharpening their knives. I pictured him sitting at the edge of his grand bed, his head buried in his hands, confusion and panic twisting his expression. For the first time in years, he wouldn't be in control. He wouldn't have the right words or the perfect smile to save himself. The gala had been his showcase of power, but now, it had become the starting point of his collapse. By afternoon, the news started circulating quietly online. A few business blogs hinted at financial inconsistencies in his company's reports. Social media began doing what it always does, turning whispers into storms. I sat back in my chair and watched it unfold, sip by sip, like a spectator at a slow-motion disaster. His perfect image, the one he had polished for years, was cracking piece by piece. Investors who once celebrated him were demanding audits. Clients were reconsidering contracts. Journalists were reaching out to sources they had ignored before, and those sources were all too eager to talk. And then there was his wife. I knew she had married him for the life he promised her, not for love. She thrived on being the elegant, admired woman at his side, draped in designer clothes, adored by everyone. But the moment the spotlight dimmed, I knew she'd turn on him. Her loyalty wasn't to him, it was to the image he had built for her. Without it, she'd abandon him like yesterday's snow. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Sure enough, within days, whispers about tension between them surfaced in the very circles they once ruled. Rumors about her secret meetings spread quickly. She was already securing her own safety, quietly distancing herself from the sinking ship. I didn't rush to strike again. No, patience was still my greatest weapon. I wanted him to feel the walls closing in, to watch as the life he built so proudly crumbled beneath his feet. I wanted him to taste the fear, the humiliation, the helplessness. But then something unexpected happened. He tried to reach out. One evening, my phone lit up with his name on the screen. For a long moment, I just stared at it, the memories of that freezing Christmas night replaying in my mind, him standing at the door, telling me I didn't belong, turning his back on me like I was nothing. I let the phone ring until it stopped. I wasn't ready yet. This wasn't about reconciliation. This wasn't about forgiveness. This was about balance. And I wasn't done watching him fall. Over the next few weeks, his decline accelerated. Lawsuits began circling his company like vultures. His friends stopped returning his calls. Invitations to elite events dried up overnight. The man who once basked in endless attention was now drowning in silence and whispers. I knew he was desperate because I started hearing from people in his inner circle. People who once praised him now spoke to me without hesitation, their resentment spilling freely. They gave me more details than I could have imagined. Numbers, transactions, names of people he had stepped on to climb his way up. Every secret they shared was another weapon in my arsenal. And I wasn't even close to finished. One night, I sat at my desk, looking over the tangled web of notes and evidence I had gathered. His empire was collapsing, but I wanted more than financial ruin. I wanted him to face the one thing he feared above all else, the truth. The man he pretended to be no longer existed. And soon, everyone in his world would know exactly who he really was. The winter cold grew harsher, but it was nothing compared to the storm building around him. By now, his world was splintering faster than he could piece it back together. The man who once carried himself like royalty was shrinking under the weight of whispers, headlines, and betrayals. I heard everything, even without trying. His so-called friends, the ones who once cheered for his success, were abandoning him one by one. Investors were freezing their funds, clients were walking away, and journalists had started digging deep into his finances. His glamorous empire, the one he flaunted with pride, had begun to collapse like glass cracking under pressure. But the real blow, that came from within his own house. I had suspected for weeks that his wife wasn't as loyal as she pretended to be. She had built her identity around his money, his status, his ability to keep her on a pedestal. And now that pedestal was crumbling beneath her, and she wasn't about to sink with him. One afternoon, I received a quiet message from someone in her social circle. It was a single photo, her, sitting in an expensive restaurant, leaning close to a man I'd never seen before. A man whose wealth, I later learned, made my son's fortune look like pocket change. I didn't need to do anything with that information. I didn't need to spread it, didn't need to expose it. Life was doing the work for me. Word travels fast in their circles, and soon enough, he found out himself. The night he learned the truth, I imagined the scene, his wife coming home late, the scent of another man's cologne faint on her coat, and him sitting there in silence, his entire world shifting beneath him. The woman who once smiled for photos at his side was already halfway out the door, her loyalty packed neatly in the luggage she intended to take with her. After that, the whispers grew louder, sharper. The media caught wind of her sudden absence from his public appearances, and rumors started swirling like a blizzard he couldn't escape. For a man who thrived on control, the chaos must have been suffocating. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I knew his company was one investigation away from disaster, so I nudged it closer to the edge. A carefully placed tip to the right journalist, an anonymous envelope containing just enough information to raise questions, nothing more. The moment the article went live, everything accelerated. Headlines screamed about questionable deals, secret accounts, and illegal transactions. Reporters camped outside his office. Cameras followed his every step. The man who once basked in attention now flinched at the sound of it. And then, like clockwork, the vultures circled closer. Lawsuits stacked up. Former employees spoke out. Investors demanded refunds they knew they'd never see. Every pillar he had built his empire on was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I watched from a distance, silent and patient, sipping my coffee while the storm raged around him. I didn't reach out. I didn't confront him. I didn't need to. He was trapped inside his own collapse, and every day, the walls closed in tighter. But as much as I wanted revenge, I didn't want destruction without understanding. I wanted him to know why. I wanted him to remember that night, the night I stood on his porch, holding a bag of gifts, while he told me I didn't belong in his life. He had erased me. Now, his world was erasing him. Still, deep down, I knew we weren't at the end yet. There was one final blow left, one strike that would leave no room for recovery. It wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't about his wife, his house, or his business. It was about pride. About dignity. About forcing him to face the one truth he spent his entire life running from. The storm I had started was tearing through everything he held dear. But the real thunder was still coming. The city was drowning in winter silence, but his world was screaming. By now, his business was under investigation, his reputation shattered, and his wife had walked out without looking back. Yet I knew one thing, he still clung to one fragile thread, his pride. Even after losing so much, he still thought he could survive the storm. He believed his charm, his wealth, his influence would save him. That was the one thing I couldn't allow. My revenge wouldn't be complete until that last mask slipped, until he was forced to face the truth he spent his whole life hiding from. So, I prepared the final strike. I waited until he announced a press conference, his desperate attempt to clear his name and salvage what was left of his empire. It was to be broadcast live, every major outlet covering it. The entire city would be watching. And so would I. I spent the next week perfecting every detail. I gathered every document, every secret, every whisper I'd collected over the months. I made sure the right people had the right information at exactly the right time. By the day of the conference, the trap was set so tightly that he couldn't escape even if he saw it coming. When the day arrived, the hall was packed with cameras, microphones, reporters, and restless whispers. I stayed at the back, hidden in plain sight, just another face in the crowd. I didn't want him to see me, not yet. He walked onto the stage wearing his best suit, that same confident smile plastered on his face. He greeted the crowd, raised his hand to quiet the murmurs, and began his speech. He spoke about trust, integrity, and family values, as though he hadn't already burned every bridge he ever crossed. But the real show started when the first reporter stood up. She asked about an offshore account he hadn't disclosed. He hesitated, stumbled, then recovered with a practiced answer. Another question came, this one about insider trading. Another about falsified contracts. Each question cut deeper, his smile cracking like thin ice under pressure. Then, it happened. The documents I had planted, every damning piece of evidence, every hidden transaction, every name he tried to bury, were leaked mid-conference. Reporters' phones buzzed in unison, screens lighting up with the truth. Within seconds, the questions turned brutal, relentless, impossible to dodge. I watched him falter, watched the sweat bead on his forehead under the harsh stage lights. His voice shook, his hands trembled, and for the first time since I started this, I saw it, the panic in his eyes. The confident, untouchable man was gone. The crowd turned hostile. Shouts echoed through the hall. Flashes from cameras lit his face like lightning striking in the dark. His wife's betrayal, his business deals, his debts, his lies, it was all there, exposed for everyone to see. And me. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood at the back, quiet, calm, invisible, watching the empire he built collapse in real time. By the time the conference ended, he wasn't the same man who had walked onto that stage. He left with his head low, his hands shaking, and the weight of the entire city's judgment crushing him. That night, headlines exploded across every platform, every channel, every feed. His name, once a symbol of success, was now synonymous with betrayal and deceit. Investors backed out completely. Lawsuits multiplied. Former allies turned against him. The fall was complete. But as I sat in my chair, sipping my coffee and watching the chaos unfold on TV, I didn't smile. There was no celebration, no laughter, no satisfaction. Not yet. Because deep down, I knew one thing. This wasn't the end. The revenge wasn't finished until he knew where it came from. Until he looked into my eyes and understood exactly why his kingdom burned. That moment was coming. And when it did, there would be no escape. The press conference destroyed him, but the silence that followed was even worse. His name had become poison overnight. Investors walked away, his company crumbled, his so-called friends vanished, and his wife. She didn't just leave, she ran. The glamorous woman who once clung to his arm like a prized possession was now flaunting her new life beside someone wealthier, and the world had noticed. I watched it all unfold from a distance. Every article, every headline, every whisper, I saw them all, like a spectator enjoying the perfect performance. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. My plan wasn't complete. There was one final piece left, the most important one of all. I didn't want him to just lose his wealth. I didn't want him to just lose his reputation. I wanted him to understand. I wanted him to remember that cold Christmas night, the way he looked at me like I was nothing, the way he told me I didn't belong. I wanted that moment to haunt him the way it haunted me. So, I waited. Days turned into a week before I made my move. I knew he'd be home. I had been keeping track of him, quietly, like I always did. His grand mansion, once buzzing with laughter and lights, now stood quiet and hollow, like an abandoned shell of its former glory. That evening, I walked up the same path I had on Christmas Eve, but this time, there were no gift bags in my hand and no hope in my heart. The snow crunched beneath my boots, and the cold bit at my face, but my steps were steady, my breath calm. I rang the bell, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, the door opened. He stood there. But this wasn't the man who had slammed the door on me that night. This wasn't the arrogant, untouchable son who looked down on everyone beneath him. He was different now, hollow, broken, shadows under his eyes, shoulders heavy with defeat. When his gaze met mine, confusion flashed first. Then shock. And then something else. A quiet, sharp realization began to take shape. He knew. I didn't have to say anything. The silence between us was thick, suffocating. The same silence he gave me that night when I stood on his porch, hoping for warmth and finding rejection instead. But now, the weight of it was different. He understood. I stepped closer, slow and deliberate, and for the first time since that night, I looked him in the eyes, really looked. I wanted him to see it. The pain. The anger. The coldness he had created. I could see it in his expression, too, the memories hitting him like shards of glass. He was replaying it all, the moment he turned me away, the humiliation, the coldness, the way he erased me from his life without hesitation. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked, and nothing came out. I let the silence linger a little longer before I finally gave him the only thing he had given me that night: distance. I turned, stepped off the porch, and walked away. No words. No confrontation. No yelling. Just silence. Because that silence screamed louder than anything I could have said. I didn't need to tell him I was behind it all. I didn't need to explain how carefully I'd planned every step, how patient I had been, how I had dismantled his perfect world piece by piece. He already knew. And I knew from the look on his face, the pale, devastated look of a man who had finally understood the price of his choices, that my revenge was complete. But as I walked away into the cold night, I felt something unexpected. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't joy. It was emptiness. Because sometimes, when the storm finally passes, the silence it leaves behind feels heavier than the chaos ever did. I had taken everything from him: his pride, his wealth, his reputation, his peace. But in doing so, I had taken something from myself, too. And yet, it wasn't regret. It wasn't forgiveness either. It was something in between, a strange, bitter calm. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully that night. But deep down, I knew one last chapter remained. The world had watched him fall. Now, they needed to know why. The city was quiet that night, covered in a soft blanket of snow that glimmered beneath the pale streetlights. My breath fogged in the freezing air as I stood by my window, staring into the darkness. His world had collapsed. His reputation was gone, his wealth stripped away, his friends scattered like leaves in the wind. The man who once believed he was untouchable now walked through life carrying the weight of every mistake he ever made. I thought that would be enough. For weeks, I imagined this moment, the silence after the storm, the peace I believed would finally settle in my chest once he felt the same pain he had given me. But instead of relief, there was something else. Something heavier, like a shadow that refused to leave. A few days later, the news broke quietly: his company filed for bankruptcy. The headlines were everywhere, each one colder than the last. Every article tore apart the man he pretended to be, exposing every hidden deal, every secret account, every lie he had used to build his empire. There was no saving him now. But strangely, I didn't feel victory. I still remember that night vividly, Christmas Eve, me standing at his door with gifts in my hand, my heart hopeful, my chest warm with love I thought still existed between us. I remembered his face, cold and unrecognizing, as he told me I didn't belong there. That moment had set everything in motion. And now, months later, standing here with everything destroyed, I wondered if revenge ever truly heals anything. Or if it just leaves you holding a different kind of emptiness. One evening, I decided to see him one last time. I found him sitting alone in a small park, the one not far from his once grand home. He looked smaller somehow. His hair unkempt, his shoulders slouched, his hands buried deep in his pockets as he stared at the frozen lake ahead. The air between us was cold, but not like before. Not sharp. Not angry. Just quiet. He sensed my presence before he saw me. His head turned slightly, and when his eyes met mine, there was no hatred. No arrogance. No pride. Just exhaustion. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The silence said everything words couldn't. In his eyes, I saw the realization, the understanding of everything I had done and why I had done it. And maybe, somewhere deep inside, he understood something else too, the love beneath the anger, the grief beneath the revenge. I didn't forgive him that night. I couldn't. But I also didn't hate him anymore. The storm inside me had burned itself out, leaving nothing but cold, quiet ashes. Without saying a word, I turned and walked away, leaving him sitting there beneath the snow-dusted trees, his breath clouding faintly in the winter air. I didn't look back. For the first time in months, I felt light. Not happy. Not healed. But free. Revenge hadn't fixed the past. It hadn't erased the pain. But it gave me something I didn't know I needed: closure. As I walked home, the city lights blurred through the falling snow, and I thought about that Christmas night one last time. About the man I had raised, the son I once loved without question, the boy I used to carry on my shoulders. Somewhere along the way, he had lost me, and I had lost him. Now, there was nothing left between us but silence. And maybe, just maybe, the chance for him to rebuild himself into someone better. I didn't care about his wealth, his reputation, or his power anymore. I didn't want his apology. I didn't even want his love. I just wanted peace. And as I closed my door that night, I finally found it. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. That's free and only way to support us. Thank you.